Hi, this is Steve with Thresher Media Group. Welcome to When You're Ready to Listen. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the truth about God, things you may not have understood, may not have been taught, or quite frankly, had a very hard time believing. And since our entire relationship with God rests on believing, it is important we learn how to separate the truth from the many lies and fictions that abound within the religion of Christianity. So when you're ready to listen, tune in and discover a pathway to freedom, encouragement, life, and hope. Introduction to Jude and Revelation, Episode 3. Toolbox 1. The Code. Key Language Elements. In the last episode, I promised that these next two podcasts will provide the tools or the keys to gain a proper understanding and application of prophecy related not just to the end times, but all throughout the biblical narrative. Jude and Revelation utilizes a unique code that is communicated through colors, numbers, symbols, and images, all of which portray a deeper or alternate meaning than what we might otherwise conclude. For example, gold is a color which speaks of divinity. White speaks of righteousness and purity. The sea speaks of tumultuous churning amongst the nations of humanity, and birds often depict demonic spirits of wickedness. The codex that we will use to break the code, or the key to understand the code, is found largely in the Old Testament, as it provides the prophetic framework for understanding both Jude and Revelation. But there are also some significant portions of the New Testament that also provide deep insight. Therefore, to properly understand Jude and Revelation, we need to be aptly versed in the entire Bible, the entire Codex, or else we risk missing the meaning underlying these codes. Now, except for certain historical matters which must be obtained from external sources, it is vital, essential, to let the Bible interpret the Bible. It is the original source and contains the best integrated contextual content where one passage explains another. Accordingly, we will use the Codex as thoroughly as possible and derive understanding from within and simply let the Bible speak for itself. When it comes to the issue of the end times, there is a big temptation to insert our own modern-day understanding of things and thereby overwrite, so to speak, the Codex, because we do not stick to the code as our guide. This has led to fiction upon fiction upon fiction, which the masses have swallowed as truth. At the beginning of Revelation, we will address toolbox number 2, which is the use of key idioms, and it contains the meaning of the code ascribed to the various colors, numbers, symbols, and images. But in this podcast, we are addressing toolbox 1, where we will focus on the exacting, precise use of language. The language. In the same way that Jesus said the smallest letter or stroke of the law was divinely inspired and would not pass away, every little detail in these New Testament books, including the way the Greek language is used, was deliberately put there by the Spirit of God working through human authors. With God, nothing is random or arbitrary, but all is intentional. And since Yahweh is the same yesterday, today, and forever, we can be confident that this truth regarding the text of the Old Testament applies also to the New Testament. Therefore, understanding the use of the language is critical to understanding what the Spirit is saying to the churches. The Spirit has used language in such a way that it reveals patterns and distinguishing characteristics that provide shocking revelation, pun intended, to those who have ears to hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Much of this is not picked up in our standard English translations due to the translation legacy or traditions that are deemed acceptable and which few dare to challenge. In addition, we do not tend to read English in such an exacting and precise manner as Greek was intended to be read and understood. Fiction alert! The importance of language distinctions. By way of example, it seems that everyone is waiting for the day when the false prophet will insist on marking everyone with 666, the mark of the beast, inserting some type of chip or other indicator on the hand or the forehead. At least that's how the fiction goes. It makes for great sci-fi material and scary movies. And quite frankly, the tech is there to chip all of humanity. However, to our total shock and amazement, the language of this passage states that even now, yes, even now, a demon, the false prophet, causes people to be marked, as causes is rendered in the present tense and not the future tense. And being in the indicative mood, we know this is a statement of fact. This detail changes the entire understanding of this passage, for clearly it must refer to a spiritual mark and not a physical mark, since the use of the present tense indicates that every moment of every now, since the time John first received the revelation, this demon causes people to be marked with the mark of the beast. And then just to reinforce this point, later on we find an angel now saying with a loud voice that if anyone now worships, present tense, the beast and its image, and now receives the mark, again the present tense, in his forehead or his hand, he will drink, future tense, of the wrath of God. We will get into the implications of this passage when we get to Revelation 13 and 14, but we can begin to see how a proper understanding of this code is vital, since it seems that most everyone is looking forward to something in the future that is happening even now. The effect is that many have already been marked, but are too deceived by the lie, by the deluding influence that convinces them of their own religious goodness, to know or understand what has happened. Thus, the code, deciphered by the precise, careful, and detailed use of language, is critical to our understanding of both Jude and Revelation. The Bible speaks for itself. When one studies the end times, one quickly becomes aware of the positional bias to which people hold. Some declare themselves to be historicists, preterists, amillennialists, or whateveralists. But as soon as a person takes a firm position, they will be forced at some point to violate the code. And they will twist and turn scriptures to fit their position, or they will omit scriptures to fit their position. Sometimes this violation is subtle, and other times obnoxiously obvious. Thus, it is best not to take a position, but to let the Bible speak for itself, even when it does not make sense to our natural minds or how we have been trained and educated in our religious institutions. Positional bias equals code violation. Now, the key language features that are important to understand are related to the use of Greek verbs. The three critical facets to know are the tense, the voice, and the mood of a verb. Understanding the tense, voice, and mood, we can better understand what the Spirit is saying to the churches. However, to ignore or discount these language features in any instance, one will never understand, but will distort what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Thus, even when the rendering does not make sense to our minds, we must avoid the temptation to make the text fit our minds and not the other way around. The tense. The tense of a verb describes how an action does or does not fit into time. This is particularly important to follow not just in Revelation, but all throughout the Codex, for it places an act or a statement within the context of time and therefore gives us a plumb line for understanding its application to us now, to those in the past, or to those in the future. There are 6 tenses that are important to our study: the present, the future, the aorist, the imperfect, the perfect, and the pluperfect. I know, sounds like a terrible grammar lesson, but please stay with me. The present tense happens in the now, obviously. The future tense clearly happens in the future. Surprisingly, this tense is used sparingly throughout Revelation, and therefore is notable when it is used. The aorist tense provides us a reference to time that is undefined. It speaks more to the occurrence of an action, the fact of an action, and not necessarily the timing or the duration. For example, I walked. It's just a statement. Therefore, the aorist can be understood to be something happening or something that will happen or has happened. And it is the most common tense used in the book of Revelation. Now, there are some rules we can follow. For instance, if the aorist is used with the indicative mood, we know that something happened in the past. However, whether it happened over a period of time or in an instant cannot be determined. It does, however, address a more discrete action. And again, it's the most common tense used to define past events. The imperfect tense indicates an action in the past that was ongoing or used to take place over a period of time. Think of it as a bit of video of an action from the past. Therefore, the imperfect is usually translated as was, were, used to, or kept. The imperfect is used if the author wants to draw attention to the duration of a past event. For instance, I was walking, or I used to walk. The perfect tense is different than the imperfect. The perfect is used in the present time to describe a completed action in the past that has an ongoing or a continuing impact. For instance, Jesus' declaration of "it is finished." The action was completed in the past, but it still has a lasting impact in the now and applies to our lives in the present. The work that he did to remove our sins is done. It is finished, and yet it is still in effect, covering the sins we did even today. And finally, the pluperfect tense is used to describe a completed action in the past that was done, finished, completed. That is the end of it. Now, most of the verb references in Revelation, as I said before, utilize the aorist tense. Thus, sudden shifts in the code to the present, the future, or the imperfect are meaningful and must be considered to properly understand a passage, as in the case of the demon who, even now, causes people to be marked. Those who do not look to the code to be their guide will get their understanding of that passage wrong. And those who teach such things will be perpetuating end times fiction. Now, the second aspect of understanding a verb is its voice. The voice of a verb gives us understanding of the subject of the verb, the one who acts or is acted upon. And it also indicates whether they chose to act or just found doing what they do. The active voice is used when the subject of the sentence is the agent of the action, the one performing the deed. Whereas the middle voice is used when the subject is both the agent of the action and participates in it. In other words, they make a deliberate choice to act. I like to say that a person digs down deep in their soul and chooses to do something. And finally, we have the passive voice, and that is used when the subject is acted upon. Throughout the Codex, the passive voice is most often used to indicate action in which Yahweh is the primary actor and we are the passive receivers of his action. The mood. The mood is the third indicator that we must look at in a verb. The mood indicates the nature of the verb and its context. For instance, the mood tells us if something is a fact or simply an expression of intent, a wish or a command, and so on. As with the tense, there are 6 key moods of which we need to be aware. The indicative mood refers to an objective fact, something real or certain, indicating a statement of fact, something upon which we can bet our lives. The subjunctive mood provides an expression of intent, yet contains this doubt, a lingering doubt as to the certainty of things. In other words, there is uncertainty as to whether the action may or may not happen. The optative mood is a wish or an expression of hope. The imperative mood is a command and is used to give orders. The participle mood indicates ongoing or continuous action. In English, it's translated with the ending of ing. For example, he is walking, or he is having dessert, or she is believing, an act that is ongoing or continuing. And finally, there is the infinitive mood, and that's used to describe acts in a general state of affairs that are dependent upon another verb. The infinitive is often translated with the English to and is used to function as a noun. For example, for me to live is Christ. The words to live are an infinitive and function as the subject of the sentence or as the noun. When the tense, voice, or mood impact our understanding of a passage, rendering it different than the English translation, or if we just generally tend not to grasp the importance of the rendering, I will spell it out and highlight it so we can start to be trained to understand the code, so we can understand what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Most of this explanation, however, will be found in the footnotes of the transcripts of each episode, which can be downloaded for free at threshermediagroup.com. That's threshermediagroup.com. Now, I know this may have seemed like boring content for a podcast, but again, the code is intended to function as our plumb line for interpreting the text all throughout the Codex. Without the code, we are flying blind, literally, and we will be making things up as we go based on what we think the Spirit is saying to the churches versus what the Spirit is even now saying. Honestly, I wish the code was taught in all our churches, Bible studies, Sunday schools, and reinforced in all our institutions of Christian learning. Understanding the code is essential and is beyond liberating. For instance, in 1 Peter 1:15, we are told, "But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourself in all your behavior." This passage always left me with a terrible guilt trip because no matter how hard I tried, I simply could not be holy. Every time I read it, I always felt as if I was failing God and therefore deserving of some punishment. Honestly, I started to close my eyes when I came near that passage so I can just skip over it and did not have to be reminded of my failure. Then, when I looked at the code, I discovered that this command is in the passive voice. This was beyond liberating. This was exciting. This was mind-blowing and something that filled me with joy. The use of the passive voice means that God is the one who must make me holy, and it's not something I can do. He is the one responsible for my transformation, which makes sense since only God is good. Once again, the truth is proven out. The source matters. The source is everything. Therefore, this passage should have been translated, according to the code, as, "But like the Holy One who called you, let him cause you to be holy in all your behavior." In other words, this speaks to my willingness to be holy or set apart for God, and not my ability to be holy. By way of another example, one of the themes in Revelation is the challenge for true believers to understand what the Spirit is even now saying to the churches. The verb saying is used 50 times throughout Revelation, and except for one passage, it is always in the present tense, active voice, and its mood is a participle. Thus, even though John heard it said somewhere around 90 to 100 AD, the Spirit wants us to understand that each statement is even now being continually spoken to those who are willing to hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches, to those who now have ears to hear. Without the code, we would fail to understand the direct implication of what the Spirit is saying to each of us. The code is the key to properly understanding the Codex. And even though a grammar lesson seems somewhat boring and not really a topic for a podcast, without the code, we are left to people's opinions, to the errant translations, and to a hodgepodge of biblical interpretation based on one's bias, background, education, worldview, and so on. The failure to use the code consistently is one of the main reasons there are so many conflicting views about biblical passages. And it is one of the main reasons for the religious fictions which abound surrounding the end times narrative. We will painstakingly stick to the code throughout this study in Jude and Revelation. We will find that so much that once seemed confusing and strange lines up perfectly with the entire biblical narrative. And we'll not have to pick and choose parts of this and parts of that to make a positional argument, but it will all be in perfect alignment. That is the beauty of the code. To get a free download of the full written transcript with all the scripture references footnoted, please go to threshermediagroup.com. That is THRESHER mediagroup.com. This is Steve with Thresher Media Group. When you're ready to listen, tune in.